was a rhythmic implosion. I couldn't believe it. Well, anyway, I told John about this at dinner, and then he went on to tell me about Dylan's getting him, turning him on, and what a difference it made in their music. So you're absolutely right in your hunch about that. Steve Hager.
I don't think I have to out myself. I think I did that 12 years ago when I came to work for High Times. But I want to talk about the sacramental use of marijuana, which I see as a very...
You know, you're speaking too close to the mic or something.
Sacramental use of marijuana, which I think is a very significant non-recreational, non-medical use of marijuana. And I wasn't a big pothead when I went to High Times magazine. I just smoked it at parties when people gave it to me. I never even hardly paid for it. But being at the magazine forced me to learn all these facts about marijuana. And at the end of the line, I'm reading the Rig Veda, which is the oldest living religious document in the world, and it's describing this ceremony that is the central ceremony of the whole culture, where these people take this plant, which they call the king of the healing plant, which heals the sick, which makes the blind see, the lame walk, and it clothes the naked, and they put it in warm milk, and they all drink it together, and they stand in a circle, and they hold hands, and they own together. And if you look at hippie culture, which has been inherited from the jazz musicians, you know, and the culture that's been created, that uses marijuana, I believe, as a sacrament, which is, the rest of the world is in denial about this, but it is in the world. And in the 60s, it's all being rediscovered, and we're trying to re-implement it, but the fact is, people don't recognize that this is a culture. It is, and the reason that it helps, I believe, is because, you know, everybody knows about contact high. Telepathy.
And it's to focus as sharply as we can on our collective task, on normal's collective tasks of transforming what we know as marijuana prohibition to what will be known as cannabis legalization. We won't be talking about the horrors of prohibition or its inefficacy and things like medical and patients. We're going to be talking about engineering. That's the key word for this panel. This panel is about engineering. Engineering. That's the key word for this panel. This panel is about engineering. Engineering the transformation of policy from marijuana prohibition to cannabis legalization.
We have to go back now to the history of the food and drug laws. In 1898, the first Food and Drug Act, which I talked about earlier, it stated that no person should, quote, sell, exchange, or deliver, or have in his custody or possession with the intent to sell or exchange any article or food or drug which is adulterated. And adulterated meant that it was not in the right strength or description that was found in the United States Pharmacopoeia. In 1906, this country signed a treaty called the Unification of Pharmacopoeia Treaty. And that treaty set forth specific required strengths of all the drugs and medicine. Again, there weren't very many back there. Well, bingo, what do you think happened next? And that was the beginning of this terribly onerous agency called the Food and Drug Administration.
Involved with several initiatives up there. He is currently involved with a campaign to regulate and tax marijuana or cannabis, which is it you're taxing?
Marijuana.
Marijuana. I always like to think of marijuana prohibition as the past and cannabis legalization as the future, but that's all right. It's a very interesting prospect they're facing up there right now, and I'm sure he'll tell you about it. Robert Lundy.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. I have been an activist in Washington State for many years, working on the grassroots level, in particular working on volunteer initiative drives to tax and regulate marijuana. And once again, I find myself involved, spending many, many hours on such a project. But this time it's a little bit different. I'm here as a representative of our organization, the Campaign to Tax and Regulate Marijuana, so I want to mention the other 3 board members who have been spending equally leave. So we want to try to push forward with this idea. That philosophy, of course, is tempered by our desire to win. And in our desire to win, we've tried to balance both talking to grassroots activists, as well as talking to the professional political consultants.
After we had all this knowledge of pot, we had done some other particular drug, and we had a revelation about hemp, that all this knowledge that we had, we realized that instantaneously that hemp was the #1 source of paper, fiber, and fuel on Earth. And we've been writing about it for a few years, so we thought we were just stoned on acid and we were going to come down. And but there we were, we came down, this is 25 years ago, and it was still there. Somehow the government of the United States had outlawed the #1 renewable crop on Earth from the equator to the Arctic Circle. This plant that could literally stop the world from poisoning itself. It was greater than all the other plants on Earth put together by many, many, many times for paper, for fiber, for fuel. So we thought, hell, knowing this, everybody's going to vote for it within 2 years. All we have to do is get this information out. Well,
Willing to get out and be like Jim Gray and hopefully get elected, and we've got to figure out how we can help them. As much as these meetings are wonderful and make me feel good, they don't pass any laws, and we've got to figure out ways of making that happen.
Wasn't any coffee shops written into the 1976 legislation? They provided an opening. And what happened over the next number of years in the Netherlands, among a population that did not want to legalize and that was bound by international conventions not to legalize, was some sort of bubbling up of people stepping out, of somebody opening up a shop, of somebody doing something, of legislators getting behind an idea. You had a bubbling up so that this coffee shop system slowly emerged, and a de facto legalization of the retail sale of cannabis even while the wholesale remained illegal. And then it started getting a little too big, and they started pushing down. The Germans and the French started getting, is don't reach for that gold ring too fast. Build your base and watch your flanks. Okay, to my mind, what Jack and Mike are doing right now in Alaska and the others is reaching for the gold ring a little too fast. But I'll tell you this, Jack, you created a public education opportunity. I don't necessarily believe that ballot initiative process is the best way to do public education, but you create a moment there. And it's a little more expensive because it's an initiative, but you're up there. So as many of you are motivated to go up there and spread the good word in Alaska, I don't think that's a bad thing to do. Public education is crucially important. Go up there, be up there, spread the word. What we learned in the DC initiative, you know, those guys argue with Bill Zimmer and AMR. They pulled off something there, and they shook the flesh, and they met thousands of people. Realistic about what we can really do and what the money will come behind, what we can reach for today and tomorrow and next year, so that in a few years we really do have a shot to grab the gold ring. And you know what's silly at this point? They're like the old temperance warriors who, after they had won alcohol prohibition, just became silly and extreme. That's where they are now. But what we don't want is a new generation of them coming up because we failed to watch our flanks. We have to be the people. We have to be the people talking about our kids. For the safety and security and well-being and good futures of their children better than the drug warriors do. That's what
origin. Well, because I'm a psychiatrist, I see a lot of mental conditions and mood disorders, certain kinds of schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, attention deficit disorder, all respond very well to cannabis because of much less side effects and improved control over the target symptoms. The freedom from side effects is very important when dealing with a chronic condition, because if the adverse effects outweigh the benefits, like with opiates, this is why opiates are really not very effective for chronic conditions, because they have the side effects of suppressing the vegetative functions, the GI tract, There especially that also depressed patients frequently. Everybody responds differently, bell-shaped curves, but in general I think I can make that distinction of relieving the other drying up effects of the opiates on different glands.
How about multiple sclerosis? If you ever...
Okay, the multiple sclerosis is a perfect prototype of this type of chronic inflammatory autoimmune condition, that the interventions with the steroids and the muscle relaxants are just grotesquely inferior to cannabis. Cannabis is effective at a much lower, almost homeopathic level.